All right. 3 minutes after, we're going to go ahead and kick off. I know some folks are just logging in. So during this time, Turnkey is working as fast as we can to bring you as much information and resources to help your organization be successful during all of this COVID-19 stuff. What does this mean? How are we supposed to be continuing on with our business? How can we steward and love on our constituents? What are our other organizations doing? We are trying to answer all of those questions as fast as we can. And that is our goal. I keep using the story or the analogy of we are the hurricane reporters by the ocean during the storm, and the rain's coming in, and then the seas falling up, and the wind's blowing my hair around, and we're just trying to bring you that quick information as fast as possible. Just a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. We are recording this webinar. I'm going to repeat it because we're going to get this question 5 times. We are recording the webinar. We're going to make sure you have access to the recording, to the deck. I promise it will be coming your way. Also, we just practiced, but as we go through this presentation, if you have any questions, use that Q&A box. It's either at the top or the bottom of your screen. We'll be monitoring those, and we'll be leaving some time at the end for those questions. Any questions we aren't able to answer on this call, we will make sure we follow up and get them answered with you, either one-on-one or in a group setting. We promise, it's being recorded, and we will answer your questions. So I think we are ready to jump in with introductions and who are all these faces you are seeing on your screen right now. So my name is Megan Rouse, and I am the Director of Partnerships and a Strategist for Turnkey. My role today is Cruise Director, so I'm here to keep these gentlemen on schedule and make sure we get your questions answered as we go along and towards the end. I have the privilege of introducing Otis Fulton, who's the Vice President of Psychology Strategy for Turnkey. Otis speaks regularly on the psychology of fundraising at national conferences. He writes a weekly blog for fundraising and psychology for Nonprofit Pro, and he's the co-author of the 2017 book Dollar Dash, the behavioral economics of peer-to-peer fundraising. Otis has a degree in social psychology from Virginia Commonwealth University and the University of Virginia. Otis, if you could wave so everyone knows who you are. And then we were joined by 2 friends from one of our partners, NAMI. So we have Amin Tarani. Amin, if you'll wave to all of our international guests today. Amin actually founded NAMI in 2008, after almost a decade at JDRF. JDRF's annual digital revenue increased from 50,000 to over 25 million during his time of working with them. Amin and the NAMI team partner with nonprofit organizations to develop and execute digital marketing campaigns that drive double-digit revenue growth for their clients. That's right, double-digit revenue growth. I like that. And then we've got Travis Sheridan, who's a strategist from NAMI as well. Travis, wave to our friends and family on this call. Prior to joining NAMI, Travis worked in the nonprofit space, helping organizations fundraise, advocate, and grow. He's passionate about building community through authentic, supporter-first digital strategy. So again, I'm the Cruise Director, but I'm gonna let these gentlemen take it away. So Otis, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to go first, guys. And as I was preparing for this webinar today, I thought it'd be useful to look back at what happened to nonprofits in the last economic recession. And I found some great research. Johns Hopkins did a study back in 2011. It was a retrospective of what had happened to nonprofits, and it had some very interesting conclusions. Now, today's environment, it's not just a recession, and I completely understand it. It's not just about economics. There are a lot of interpersonal things that we're all dealing with, and it makes it different, and yet some ways the same in terms of how nonprofits dealt and actually thrived during the last recession. 83% had reported being stressed, and this is data from a large swath of nonprofits, thousands across the country. About 40% said the stress was severe or very severe, and 51% reported that they had declining revenue. This chart kind of shows where that came from. Most contributions are made by individuals in the United States, and so you can see that most nonprofits were down 10 or more % in terms of individual donations, and then it goes down the line from private contributions, foundations, government, endowments, and so forth. So it really hit them from a number of from really every angle possible. And yet they really showed tremendous resilience. It was fascinating to me to learn that while the for-profit sector had a big decline in employment, the nonprofit sector actually boosted employment during the recession. More than 2/3 of the respondents said that they were very successful in coping with the fiscal crisis. And also interesting, most organizations, 3/4, they actually maintained or increased the number of people that they served, especially if they served vulnerable populations. So they were actually very successful. And they relied on a variety of coping strategies, belt tightening, using more volunteers. But two that really stood out to me was that many organizations stepped up their marketing efforts. They didn't go into a holding period at all. They took quite the opposite approach. And over half launched new or expanded their fundraising efforts. So again, they were very, very aggressive in fighting back against the economic recession. Now, as I mentioned, this is different. This is not just an economic recession. This is really a recession that was triggered by a medical emergency and so forth. It's going to go on for a long time. And I think it's so useful for us as fundraisers to think about how our donors, or there are people, how are they being affected? They're dealing with the same things that we are. Isolation, stress from any number of angles. I'm stressed out about whether I can get my hair cut or not. I don't know when I'm going to. Should I have somebody come to my home? The sources of stress are just numerous for everyone, and it really makes us feel powerless. Not being able to really do anything about our personal situations, our family situations, our financial situations. There's, again, our sources of power, or what psychologists call agency, has been taken away from us in many different respects. So what I believe is that this is a particularly good time to adopt what I have come to really believe in, is a donor-centric approach to fundraising and to messaging in general. I think that this is the best approach to communicating with nonprofit constituents and supporters at any time, but especially during this time where there's the crises and all these personal aspects that people are feeling threatened and so forth. Donor centricity is pretty simple. It's to get started, you just think, how is your U count today? And making it more about the donor than about your organization is more important now than ever. And I'm going to give you an example of somebody who's done it really, really well. This organization, the Royal Navy Lifeboat Institute, is in the United Kingdom. The UK doesn't have a Coast Guard. They have a series of private organizations that do sea rescues and so forth. And this is something that they sent out to their constituents very early. This was March 19th, about 2 weeks ago. Crew members look out for each other, and they made it all about the donor. And you don't have to believe me. Just see how many times they said the word you. Supporters like you, that makes you. So here's a special message from you, for you. And it wasn't an ask, it was just a very human response to, we're thinking about you, we empathize with you, how are you doing? And many times we tell our donors and our supporters that they're a member of our family. And this is a great time to treat them like they're a member of your family. And if they're a member of your family, you'd ask them, call them up and say, how are you doing? And I want to share the video that goes along with this campaign, because I thought it was so powerful and really so pitch perfect for these times.
Hi there, my name's Dave, and I'm a volunteer crew member. When we answer the call for help, it's an uncertain time. We don't know what we'll face, and we don't know when we'll see our loved ones again. But the thing that keeps us going is your support. And now, wherever you are, you're probably feeling uncertain about the future too. That's why I wanted to get in touch and say, today, we're sending our support to you. Because you're part of the crew, and crew members look out for each other. So on behalf of the Lifesavers, thank you so much for thinking of us in the past. Right now, we're thinking of you too. We hope you're able to stay safe and well. From everyone at the RNLI, take care.
I don't know if you could hear that. My audio actually, I couldn't hear the audio for it, but that tone was just absolutely perfect. And it's so important to reach out to your supporters and so forth. Now, I just heard of a major organization that hadn't messaged their supporters since March 15th. And you just can't let that happen. You've got to reach out to your supporters and let them know that they're important to you, that the work is continuing, and that you'll be in touch. You know, this is not a great time to make that first connection and ask for money, but it sets the stage for their involvement sometime down the road. One other one I'll share with you, then I'm going to turn it over to my friends at Reverend Navi, is this was a campaign that came out on the 27th, just a few days ago, from the Humane Society. And you can see they were trying to raise $25,000. I am a monthly supporter of the Humane Society. They had 659 donors. This was on a Facebook fundraiser. Average donation about $34. I can tell you that this was effective for one person. It was effective for me because I donated to the campaign. And I reached out to my friend John Varenas, who's the Chief Development Officer for the Humane Society, and he had some interesting things to say yesterday. You know, he feels like it's really important that they, of course, have connected this to coronavirus directly. I feel like if you can do that, if you're a healthcare organization that deals perhaps with population who are more at risk, certainly making that credulity with your folks, your connection. But if you can connect it to coronavirus, fine. I also feel like if you can't, that's not a reason not to fundraise, because your constituents have been there for you in the past. They're interested in your mission going forward. And John told me that they do about half and half of request type messaging where they're asking for funds, and just update messages where they're updating people on the activities of the organization. And I think that's a great mix in any time, but I think it's a particularly good one now. I think that 50-50 is a really good mix. So now I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to Amin and Travis, and they're going to show you some other great examples of the work that they're doing.
Thanks, Otis. And I'm glad that I've remembered to unmute myself before I started talking. So thank you all for tuning in. At NAMI, we've been partnering with organizations for 12 years to help build long-lasting, meaningful relationships with constituents that hopefully ultimately drive revenue. One of the things I want to remind you all is feel free to enter questions into the Q&A as we go through this. We really want to spend the second half of this call answering your questions or brainstorming with you and really learning from you guys as well. I'm Amin, as I mentioned, and I'll turn it over to my colleague Travis, who will take us through what we're going to cover with you guys today.
Thanks, Amin. Okay, so if we go to the next slide. Well, it's been a long month, to say the least. There's not much here to say that's not already been said hundreds of times by now. None of us expected to be here in a new reality where we're social distancing, we're working from home, and we're being forced to radically rethink the way our organizations operate and communicate. We're here today to share our thoughts on the current situation and how we feel organizations can respond in an authentic way. So we've got a few goals for today. First of which is to discuss the current landscape. We want to share some observations we have and also highlight some opportunities on how you can communicate effectively. We also want to show some relevant examples from other organizations. Amin, I'm not sure if you have anything to add there.
Yeah, I just want to say that we went back in time and looked at past moments where we could pull models together and looked at the Spanish flu to try and come up with a solid model for how digital advertising or digital media played a role. But unfortunately, we couldn't find any organizations that were doing digital advertising in the early 20th century. So we are where we are.
Great, thanks. And lastly, we of course want to learn from you guys, take your questions and answer them to the best of our ability. So we're gonna start this off actually with a question for you guys. So Megan's gonna throw a question up here on Zoom, and we're hoping that folks can take a second to answer it.
Give it about one more second. Do you plan on messaging about a COVID-19 fundraising gap this upcoming year? Your choices are yes, no, and not sure yet.
Cool. So no one has a no answer for that one. So that's nice to know. It's either yes or not sure. So I'm guessing a maybe, or you have to run it by someone to be sure. But it's a real interesting time right now. Normally, this is a huge time for live entertainment. You'd have the NCAA tournament going on, March Madness. Baseball would have started its season. The NBA and NHL playoffs would have been happening. The Masters, the Olympics were scheduled for later this summer. The Country Music Awards, Tribeca Film Festival, political debates and conventions. And as we were joining this call, the Democratic convention has now been delayed till August. I'm sure the Republican convention will follow suit at some point. And as a result of all this planned live entertainment, it's a real quiet time for movie and TV releases. There's not a lot of content that was scheduled for now, okay?
So going hand in hand in that, obviously advertising has decreased really dramatically, and obviously travel adjacent businesses have ground to a halt, and that's kind of the first ones that we think of when we think of who's pulling back on advertising. So airlines, cruises, hotels, car rentals, tours are all having to kind of pull back and press pause on their activity.
Yeah, and anything that's relying on a shared space or shared experience is also pulling back. So local bars and restaurants, chain bars and restaurants, live sporting events that are happening, concerts, film, all the movies that were going to come out on Memorial Day and the advertising associated with that, retail, gyms, co-working spaces, wedding-related businesses, and even college and universities, who we have a few clients in that space, are pulling back recruitment ads because they don't want to be tone deaf at a time where they're sending students home.
And it's not just big national companies and brands, right? Local community businesses and staples of our everyday life are pulling back on advertising too. Daycares, SAT prep, tutoring, barbers for Otis to get his haircut at, kids' sports leagues and classes are all also having to, press pause on their business activity and pull back on their advertising as well. And the last piece to this is that it's not just travel, hospitality, live events, and retail. It's also all the media and publications that cover these things that are pulling back on communications too, right? So if you turn ESPN on out of habit right now, they're probably showing NBA Finals reruns rather than live sports. And a lot of us with kids are used to this picture with us in the background on our phones while they watch TV or play games to occupy themselves. And even folks like travel influencers who would normally be going to beautiful places and promoting their content are just stuck posting the same latte photo every day. So this is our new reality. Many of us have more time than ever to stare at our devices, and there just isn't that much compelling content to watch. So in this new world,
the Tiger King is king. Is this because it's the greatest show ever created? Perhaps, depending on your opinion. Or is it because there's a huge captive audience with nothing to entertain them? And the timing just worked out so that Joe Exotic and his friends are the most popular thing and something that everyone's talking about right now.
Tiger King is pretty freaky. I mean, you do have to admit.
It is definitely an exciting and new experience, but I don't want to spoil it for anyone for the one person on the call who's just hearing about it now. So But there is also good news. It's not all bad, and this is going to be a temporary situation that passes. We don't know when that's going to happen, but this will not be what the world is like forever. And we have captive audiences, social media usage through the roof, with no real content to keep folks entertained. Media costs are so low that if you happen to go on Instagram or Facebook now, you'll notice a lot of the ads are for Instagram or Facebook on the other's platform. Facebook is advertising on Google to, hey, you should log in and check out what's going on Facebook. And people really want to feel connected and useful, right? So the real challenge here is, or the real opportunity, if you will, can you create a moment where focused on your supporters that's more constituent centric, and use this opportunity to build a relationship with them that creates brand affinity? Because maybe at the end of all this, there's a V-Day type moment where people will want to be connecting socially and in real life more so than ever. And is this the opportunity where we can connect with folks so that future asks or event registration asks are all going to be more successful, because at this time you were able to fill the need for them. Now, we don't really believe in cookie cutter solutions. We think every organization is different and their constituency is different, and how they might relate to COVID-19 is different. So as we run through examples, we wanted to start with two organizations that already had planned campaigns that couldn't be moved, that were right in the midst of the COVID outbreak, right? So I'd like to start with Covenant House. So as we look at their ads, what you're going to see here is on the left side, every year they do a March meal match, right? Historically, they were a Catholic organization. It ties into Lent a little bit, though that's not really what they lean into these days. But we found that in the past, positive messages about how meals were helping these kids find their way out of homelessness was what resonated really well. Well, right in the middle of March, everything started to go down, and people were being told to shelter in place, and they had a meal match, and the timing and budget goals and spends were all kind of locked in. So we continually adapted the message, and what we found at the end was a longer update focused on tying them in, which was good for them because there was an overlap with homeless kids who relied on school lunches to provide their meals, now not being able to go to school, and an added cost for Covenant House to continue to feed them, focusing on how the constituent was helping to provide that with a longer update, which typically a shorter ad works better. But in this unique time, really expressing the connection between the constituent and who they were helping and how it was relevant has led them to see 4 or 5 times the return on investment they usually do in the March Meal Match program. And at the end, we're not even mentioning March Meal Match, just the case why the constituent is needed and how what they're going to do is actually going to help people right now. So this one was easy to kind of pivot on given the organization and the mission. Now, one of our other clients, NAMI, has a unique challenge in that May is Mental Health Awareness Month. A lot of their walk campaigns were scheduled for April and May to tie into that to help build momentum. What you'll see here on the left is what their typical walk ad might look like. Last year, we're actually working with them, and there's a rough cut of a new ad that we're kind of working on the right, where we'll see someone walking in their shadow alone, leaning into the message that you are not alone, that just because we can't be together doesn't mean we can't be here for each other. All of the messaging is kind of being cleaned up. But the idea is, how can we use this moment to go out to those events that will need to be virtualized, and to constituents who maybe in the past have lapsed from supporting the organization, but in this unique environment, given the isolation and feelings of anxiety and depression that might come with that, is this an opportunity to create a connection that's authentic and kind of natural, right? Now, there's one other poll question we kind of wanted to ask you guys, and I'll throw it over to Megan on that. And I see Wayne Baldaro from NAMI throwing out that he knows them. And thank you, Wayne, for letting us use the rough cut ad on the right for this presentation. The question we had, Megan, was, how do you feel about your revenue targets for the rest of the year? No worries, we're working on them, or we might be able to meet them, but might need to rethink our strategy. as we learn how to do webinars, I think Jeopardy music would be great for these.
I know, I was just about to say, cue something. I'm gonna leave it open for about 10 more seconds. Looks like the voting has kind of slowed down. There you go.
Cool. So no one's in the no worries bucket. Well, that's kind of what we expected too. But there's a lot of anxiety right now, and maybe there's an opportunity to kind of, instead of trying to recoup that lower cost, that 60 cents on a dollar by turning everything virtual, maybe you can tweak your message and get more than the dollar you were expecting before. Now, one note, we actually had the quizzes in a different order, so we were going to ask you guys if you were going to incorporate it into year end at this point, just to throw Travis back into his natural rhythm, like a lot of you mentioned yes earlier. So Travis, I'll let you take it from there.
Thanks, Amin. So I think both responses to both questions are instructive here, and it's clear that a lot of folks are either planning on messaging around about a fundraising gap due to COVID come year end, or at least considering it. And if it's 25 organizations plan on this call, I think it's fair to assume that that's going to be most every organization's plan. So now's the time to ask yourself if you want to be out there doing the same thing as what thousands of other organizations are doing. And ultimately, it might be necessary. We all do year-end fundraising, but we need to be thinking about what we're doing now too, and how it might impact what we do in the future. So our take here is that we need to be thoughtful and show our supporters we're listening to them, help them feel connected, not only to each other, but also connected to and helpful to those that the organization serves. We really view now as an opportunity to build a foundation of long-term, meaningful relationships that are going to be critical come fall, when things are hopefully coming back to normal, events start happening, and organizations start their end-of-year fundraising. So I'm going to take you through a couple examples right now of organizations that we see taking this kind of supporter-centric, longer-term view on the current situation. The first one here is from Susan G Komen. They're hosting weekly tea times for metastatic cancer patients on Zoom. And basically they're seeing a need for folks who might not be able to have that sense of community they're used to having during this time, likely immunocompromised, so they're taking the social distancing and quarantining really seriously. And Komen here is thinking about, okay, cool, how can we create a space for these folks to still feel connected, both to themselves and also to know that the organization is there to support them in whatever they need. So we really love this idea. And the second one here is from Save the Children. And they've been doing putting out a bunch of really thoughtful, constituent-focused resources. Everything from leveraging existing celebrity relationships. They've got Amy Adams and Jennifer Garner reading kids' stories. They're actually producing content for parents and guardians who are at home with their kids all day to fill some of the time and make it a little more impactful. So you see on the left here, they created a whole hub where they're posting weekly learning activities, tips for how to talk to kids about coronavirus. They're even creating like some hand washing posters with light Save the Children branding that parents can print out and hang up in the bathroom. So we really love this example too, and we think it's a great opportunity to kind of think about what your supporters need and how you can help fill that gap.
Yeah, and both of these examples are things that we could be pushing out to constituents just to let them know how the organization is helping these people. Because if in the Save the Children example, if you can fill their need, then they'll be much more responsive when you ask them for something later. In the other example, if you can demonstrate how you're filling the needs and executing the mission with a bite-sized kind of impact statement with that little tea time, you don't have to explain a long how research is helping to fund X kind of thing. It's very easy to comprehend. Those people may also be people who support you later in the future. Now, as we said, we don't believe in cookie cutter solutions. I think every organization needs to figure out what their meaningful connection is at the moment. So we want to take you through an example to potentially kind of, we do want you to throw in Q&A questions into the Q&A, because we're relying on you guys to help us generate the second half of this webinar. But also just to kind of walk you through this. So we know there's organizations with walks that have been canceled. For example, you might have a local grocery store who's a sponsor of your event every year, who now is sitting there and not sure if they're going to sponsor you or how they might be able to be involved. As Travis mentioned in the Komen example, you might have cancer patients who are immunocompromised at higher risk and cannot leave their homes, right? You may have local staff who's probably working really hard to come up with plans on how they're going to hit these close these revenue gaps that you have, and probably facing a lot of anxiety on what to do at the moment, because there's a lot of, well, there's not a great time to kind of put this out there kind of thing. So do they have some excess capacity potentially, or can you rework their nervous energy to maybe call that local grocery store and see, like, hey, would they be willing to work with you on a grocery delivery program for these high risk individuals who are stuck at home now? And then is there an opportunity to use that to reach out to potential volunteers, or take the fact that you're doing this to help these at-risk patients and put that out there so that you're creating this warm and fuzzy moment, and making them a part of something that is also going to be an uplifting story, which may also turn out to be something that the local news picks up. Are there opportunities for you guys to create programs like this? And in every organization, this will be different. Yeah, and that's kind of where we'll leave you guys. I'm sure you're probably tired of us talking through all this stuff and the sounds of our voices. So happy to kick it back over to Megan for how we handle the questions.
Perfect. So if you'll use that Q&A, we did that practice at the beginning. I'm actually very proud of our team for leaving so much time for questions and answers. I hosted a webinar on Friday and made the promise that I would have time for questions and answers, and I failed everyone miserably. So this is redemption time. If you'll use that Q&A box, we have a note from Dave that I think this is a great discussion point as well. He says, FYI, in Canada, a wage subsidy program is being rolled out, so there may not be a gap, it just depends. Do we see, and maybe we'll start with Otis, put him on the spot, do we see any opportunity or strategic way of positioning our communication and or ask with some of the subsidies that are happening kind of around from our government? I know you talk a lot about getting people's permission before you ask, so I'd love if you could help us dive into this one a little bit.
I'm sorry, just clarify it a little bit. Permission from the government, what?
Sorry, the government's helping, with wage, with subsidizing programs, right? So we're helping with, the $600 extra, or programs for companies to keep from layoffs or things like that. So does that change this time now that we're kind of getting that financial assistance of what we're allowed to ask for or how we can ask for it?
It's funny. I just wrote copy this morning. One of the things I do for Turnkey is write copy for clients. And I don't even know if this organization is a client, but it got to me so much I wanted to write for them. It's an organization in North Texas. It's in a community of about 2,000 people, and they have a residence for their veterans. And the veterans that they have on site had all been tested and all were negative for coronavirus, and they're keeping them secluded because they're all older. And the problem is that the supermarkets are rationing groceries, so they can't shop for them. They can't get clothes because the church is closed, but they usually get the clothes from. And these guys can't get their government subsidies because the government workers aren't working right now, so they're raising funds for them. So perhaps I'm making a short answer long, but I think that there's every opportunity to fundraise now, to connect people with the missions that they've been connected to, and tell them what you're doing. If it involves the subsidies, great. If it doesn't, that's great too. So there's all kinds of ways to work. Anything that's happening into your message is what you want to talk about with folks. Amin, do you have some thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I was going to say there's one other example that we didn't incorporate because it was timely, but the time may have lapsed a little bit. But the JCC and a series of social services organizations that kind of banded together pre the stimulus bill passing in the US and basically put together what we find to be normally a lead acquisition campaign, where they were asking people to join on to help send letters to their member of Congress about how vital those social services organizations are and their need to be included in the bailout. That was a timely thing that seemed to be very effective. And that may come up again as we get deeper into the summer.
Great. Right now, we are focused on spring and helping our chapters get through that season. How should we position our fall events right now, and what might be a good timeline if not now? I mean, I'm gonna start with you because you kind of alluded to this at the beginning of, if we all go to fall, it's gonna be pretty busy trying to get everyone's attention. So what should we be doing now if we have fall events? What would be your advice?
That's a great question. What we're looking to do, and every organization again is different, but we think it's a great time to establish those relationships. So I'll go back to Komen because it's part of something, that tea time is part of something we're actually working on with them, because all of their events have been delayed to the fall, right? So there's a need to kind of restart events that were in the spring that will now be on pause in terms of fundraising message. And there'll also be a lot of campaigns that will need to be run. Now, our philosophy is always kind of constituent centric. So we always think you should be doing these types of messages well in advance of doing these campaigns. The unique opportunity now is that because of the crisis and how you may be responding to it, like we can take that example from Komen's tea time and create a post that talks about during this difficult time, affiliates all around the country are, doing things like hosting virtual tea times because we don't want metastatic breast cancer patients to feel like they're alone. And then taking that, and instead of doing our typical prospecting or like or fan building kind of campaign, taking that message, but targeting it to the people we would normally target with walk registration ads. Now, they're going to self-identify by liking, clicking, responding to it. And then we'll be able to retarget those people with registration ads in June, for example, for an August walk, when it's more appropriate to kind of recruit people into it, right? Other organizations like bike rides that would normally be recruiting now, the event's still in the fall, but now they've had to put their recruitment on pause. We're taking things like their video from last year and turning it into a thank you video. And then adding a message about, at this time, we're all in this together, not making it about registration at all, just about how great the event was last year, kind of building into a little bit of FOMO or playing on how isolated people might feel now and how good it would be to be part of a community. And then we can go back to them in 60, 90 days because they're self-identifying with this. And the cost for all these campaigns is so low right now that it's incredibly cost effective for us to do too, because let's say we spend $2 for a person now to self-identify, we can cut the cost to get them to register in half later in the year. So sorry, a little bit of rambling there.
Nope, that's great. Let's see, Lauren says that we are small veteran housing, also having the same issue that we talked about earlier. And Lauren, we're going to share a slide before we call it a day on this call, but we have a ton of resources. Otis has spent hours talking about that communication and what it's okay to ask and how that use centric and how to talk to your audience. So we'll share this slide before we leave that has that link. And then obviously I'll be sending out my contact information after this call too. Happy to connect with you one-on-one. The next question is, we've had a lot of turnkey webinars, period. Let's just take a breath on that. We've had a lot of turnkey webinars, but we've been stressing about building that community before fundraising. We talk about a lot, this is the time to reach out to those folks that love us and love on them. If we had to divide our time and energy, what percentage should we give to building the community versus fundraising?
Weigh in. Yeah, I really like the half and half. This, by the way, is not the time to worry about acquisition. Acquisition is a very expensive endeavor, and this is the time to worry about keeping your folks and deepening your connection with them. One thing that's interesting in the last recession, the people that stayed with an organization more than made up for the lack of the drop in donations for the people that left organizations. So now is the time to really nurture those relationships, as Amin was saying, and this is not the time to worry about acquisition.
Yeah, and one thing, there's an analogy I'd like to throw out here, which I think makes it easier to understand like our underlying philosophy. If you go up to people and ask them to leave a bar with you, your success rate is pretty low, right? And that's like the fundraising ask, like give me money, is like the last thing you want to ask. First, you want to find out what their name is and what their interests are. And that's slightly more effective. So this is kind of an introductory period and a thank you period before getting them ready to be comfortable enough with you for you to ask them to help you move, kind of thing.
I like that. Now we all know about it.
I'm not sure that example is talking about helping with the move across town. I don't.
Oh, well, that's like in a friend relationship, like as old.
Okay.
Joke.
I'm just
about like
it.
That's like asking another friend to marry you. Will you help me move my stuff from one house to another? I wish I knew who the anonymous attendee was, but yes, that does say.
I have an idea.
Yes.
Okay, so my contact information is on the screen. It looks like there's another question that came in. No. We still have a few minutes. If you have any additional questions, like I said, I'll be reaching out after this as well, just to see if this conversation brought up any questions or any other things that you want to dive deeper into. We have a ton of resources. We are trying to be great partners in the space and just help you navigate what is COVID-19. And so that link is on this as well, and we'll be emailing that out. Thank you again for joining us. We'll hang out just for another minute or two to see if any other questions come in. If not, who doesn't like an extra 15 minutes back in their day? I'm just getting notified that I'm supposed to plug an upcoming webinar. Hold on, everyone. Don't log off just yet. This is the exciting part.
I've got one other comment.
Yeah.
Boy, you think this might be crass, but this is the time to do it. Legacy bequests. Usually in successful bequest programs, these are programs that ask folks to leave money after they pass away to the organization. You know, the letter goes out maybe once a year. This might be a good time to craft a very thoughtful, sensitive bequest letter saying, listen, the future's uncertain for everyone. If God forbid you'd like to leave a legacy to the organization, now is the time for us to talk about it. Just something that's very soft in its tone and so forth. Now, you know, the folks that leave, it's very interesting when you dig into the research, the folks that leave the bequests are not multimillionaires and so forth. Usually they're folks that have been donating regularly and for a period of years. So they'll make 3 or 4 donations over a year's period, and they've been doing that for a number of years. Those are the people that are extremely good prospects for leaving a legacy bequest. So it's on everyone's top of mind. There's no use ignoring it. And again, crafting a thoughtful message about a legacy bequest would, I think, really be in folks' best interest right now.
Got it. And we actually had one other question come in. I mean, can you talk about the best way to get ads out? It's kind of a, it's not very specific, but in terms of like, Lauren says we've been self-funded up until now, up until our business was shut down. What's the best way to get the ads out?
Yeah, I'm not sure in terms of finding, like, sorry, Lauren, could use a little more context here in terms of finding money to spend on ads. That's where I'm gonna assume it's that. But for nonprofits, reaching possible donors. Oh, well, I mean, so I'm gonna answer this 2 ways. One, there are programs like Google Grants where organizations can give free advertising. So that's one way to kind of get the ads out. A lot of the things we mentioned today could be things you do in organic social posts that get out there. The reach on those is more limited. One of the secrets about Facebook is they also like to generate a lot of revenue. So they like you to pay to reach larger audiences. This wasn't really a sales pitch for us, but one of the things that organizations can do is you can take your constituent database and compare it against Facebook users. And if there's an overlap, target that specific subset with messages. You can target people who visited your website with specific messages. You can target people who are similar to those groups. You can target the general public. So depending on what the information you want to put out there is, there's different ways using the different platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram's advertising platforms, to get to those people.
Yeah, the friend of mine's with the Nature Conservancy, and they very successfully poached the Audubon Society list on Facebook. And so they had a very successful campaign with the Audubon list, which they purchased from Facebook, which is what Amin's talking about.
Okay, I think that is it for questions. I'm just going to plug next Tuesday. We're going to be talking about Giving Tuesday now. Kelly, thanks for putting that one on a Tuesday. Thursday, we're going to be talking about the state of Facebook fundraising. And then the following Tuesday, creating forward movement when it's crass to fundraise. So it's a repeat for us, but talking about building up that community and what this looks like for our constituents at this time. Thank you again for joining, and we will be following up with the recording as well as additional information. Thanks to my fabulous co-host, or our fabulous panel. I wasn't even a co-host. Thank you, gentlemen, for your knowledge, expertise, and we really appreciate the time. Bye, everybody.
Take care.